We are moving on to Grow Intelligence. And earlier this week, well, I think it was last week, there was a report about about it shutting down. And I think this is interesting and important for a number of reasons. One would be Grow Intelligence is not a 2-year-old startup that suddenly ran out of money. It's a company that was founded in 2012, if I'm not mistaken. And it was built on a premise that we could help get data for Africa primarily. And I don't know if you've done any sort of work either in business or even as a journalist. Getting data in Africa is hell. There's a whole lot of struggle with getting data, and then you also need accurate data. And just in addition to that, you also need up to date data. So we definitely need all of that. And there was also the infusion of artificial intelligence to make sense of the data that they were collecting. So yes, the primary proposition was for the agricultural sector and then in the climate tech space. But like I mentioned, Grow Intelligence is not it's not an upstart that is just coming out from nowhere. They've been around for a while. So what could have gone wrong? I mean, earlier you mentioned that a lot of what we are discussing is just based on conjecture, and that's correct. But for as an outsider looking in, we heard quite a number of stories. So what do you think could have gone wrong at Grow Intelligence?
I said this to you yesterday.
Yeah.
Grow is one of those companies that we've heard about. Like, we know there is a Grow Intelligence. We hear about them. But that's pretty much it, right? We don't even as a journalist, when I used to write for Techpoint, it wasn't one of those companies that was always on my radar. It always was like this mature company that was doing very cool stuff. And to be honest, it wasn't a very African
Yeah.
sounding company. Not because it was not Africa, it was focused on Africa, obviously, it was collecting. But Grow is one of those companies that the narrative and the storytelling was global. It was a global perspective. It wasn't Africa was definitely a huge focus where it started, where a lot of the work was being done. But you
Yeah.
could do an internet search and you see articles like Grow is fighting world hunger. That's the direction you see, you know. Now, the question about Grow, and this makes it very difficult to talk about Grow, right? It makes it very difficult to talk about Grow because we don't know, personally, I don't know what types of data Grow Intelligence collected. Like, I'm not sure how disaggregated it was. I don't have any real insight into the product itself. It's one thing to say okay, we collect and aggregate data. What types of data? How disaggregated was that data? To what degree was it broken down? Did it include, like, proprietary data from private sources, or was this just an aggregation play of all publicly available data sets, and then you build an algorithm on top of all of
Yeah,
that?
so just to
Sort of.
like provide a little context, they reportedly collected data from governments. I think, including the U.S. government. I'm not completely certain, but they collected data from governments, private companies, like you mentioned, publicly available data, and the focus was usually on climate tech data and agricultural data. But like you also mentioned, just for us who are outside, there's no clarity on the exact kind of climate data, for example, or agricultural data that we were collecting. So yeah, you can go on.
Yeah, so Columbia Magazine had an article out where they discussed that Grow is like the largest agriculture and climate related database, which is also a different point. At some points, Grow was agriculture, at some other point, it was climate.
Mm.
So it felt like it wasn't sitting in any one of those boxes. You wanted to do agriculture because you can yield a lot of data from that sort of work, but then it's also climate because, like, climate and agriculture are interrelated, and climate was it was a good story. It was a very big narrative. So if you sort
Mm-hmm.
of wave the climate narrative, you're positioning yourself properly, both from a business and marketing perspective, but also from a company story perspective. So essentially, this Columbia Magazine article was done as early as, or as late as, last year, right? This was late last year, and it mentioned that Grow, has 170 data sets from public and private sources. And even Sarah Menka said, even after you organize all of that, there's still a ton of missing data and all of that. So, but again, we can skip all the conversation about the technical and product details of Gro Intelligence and exactly how they manage to organize and collect all of that data. That's backbreaking work. What's tough, and Emeka Ajene has also pointed this out when he made that tweet that got a lot of attention about Grow Intelligence, was that maybe Grow Intelligence found it a bit difficult to commercialize the information that they had. And I told you this when we were speaking yesterday evening. One of the, I think, one of the gold standards when you think about business data applications is Bloomberg, right? The Bloomberg terminal, not the news Bloomberg, the Bloomberg terminal. And I think at this point it's very intuitive to people, right? Why
Yeah.
at least a significant degree of Bloomberg's success. Yes, it aggregates a lot of data. Yes, it's the finance world, which is a very, very data heavy intensive space, but also it's essentially become like a tool that allows people function in their jobs. It's not an
Yeah.
assistant. It doesn't just make your job easier. It doesn't just make it nicer and cooler because you're using that tool. I mean, it does all of those things, obviously, right? But it's pretty much become integrated in a lot of the workflows of a lot of the top companies. And Bloomberg even benefits from that because you use Bloomberg, it gets the data, and then to get the data, you have to use Bloomberg. And so there's this reinforcing loop around Bloomberg itself. So I think that's one of the things that really that sets that thing apart. And
Yeah.
it's also the challenge that data applications, need to also sort of figure out and try to resolve. Personally, I'm also working on a food systems logistics data sort of product thingy. And it always comes to that question, right? Is anyone going to wake up and say, for me to do my job, I need
Yeah.
to use
You
this
need your
tool?
data. Yeah.
Because it's only when they have to use the tool to do their job that it makes a lot of sense for them to sort of be actual users. Otherwise, what happens is you begin to devolve into a consultancy. And the Arc Founder magazine that essentially announced Grow Intelligence shutdown had already done a piece some months back, when they talked about some of the struggles. And it essentially came down to that. There's a sentence somewhere that I'm paraphrasing, that says something like Grow Intelligence was essentially doing consultancy projects, which is nice.
Yeah.
It's a great model on its own if you're a market research company. It's not maybe the best model if you're a technology product company. Because a market research company, can say, okay, we have one, two, three, four clients. They give us a project, we do project costing, we submit a brief, we walk through all the sales cycle. We get this project for 4, 5, 6 months. We go out, do the market surveys, do research, collect data, and we deliver a report, we deliver a dashboard, we present the outcome of that project, whichever way we want to present it. For a technology product, can you imagine Bloomberg having to take on the consultancy for JP Morgan, and then they'll go out, they'll do like a 6 months project, and then they'll come back and give it to JP Morgan? I mean,
Yeah.
that could be a model that they could, Bloomberg data could have, but now it's a technology product. The terminal itself now is not unique in itself, right? You don't
Yeah.
need an actual Bloomberg device. You can use your laptop, you can use your phone, but the software is now sort of integrated into people's workflows. If I was a trader at some hedge fund or whatnot, I did not just rely on Bloomberg for trade data and trade information flows. I actually chat with fellow traders on the Bloomberg chat function. I can trade jokes, and it's part of my work too. It's almost like how you go to work as a journalist. You open your computer, you go to Microsoft Word or Google Meets or whichever word application that you Google Word or whatever word application that you use. It's part of your workflow. So that's it.
Yeah.
And that's the big commercialization question when it comes to data products. Again, from outside, I don't see that Gro had that thing figured out yet, um, which is very disturbing, right? It's very
Yeah, so
disturbing.
that's just going to cut you in. It's disturbing, and I think I mean it has me thinking right now. We've seen companies with similar models, not at growth scale, but they've also experienced similar struggles. So I mean, just like we discussed with Copia, are there certain business models that we should start rethinking in Africa, or probably our approach to them? Should we really start rethinking some of these conversations? So, I mean, we are running out of time, but can you in 2 minutes just a lot of what we've said today has pointed to the need for proper postmortems whenever companies fail. So can you in 1 minute, look, I've been told I have 1 minute now. So in just 1 minute, can you just speak to the need for postmortems by people who were in the arena, as opposed to just random opinions by people who did not really have visibility into what was going on?
We definitely need postmortems, and we don't just need postmortems. We need honest, raw. Um, I'm going to put this on the investors, not just the
Okay.
founders, right? Running a company, building a company is a very emotional thing for founders. So maybe they will not be in the emotional headspace to really talk. But people that are around the company, maybe not the CEO and the founder, maybe people just below them, operations people, and investors, people that commit capital, it's
Yeah.
imperative. It's imperative that these postmortems are not just, again, Africa is a very small fish in the whole venture capital ecosystem. If you do your postmortem for your small $10 million fund and you keep it inside, maybe it gives you some advantage, but the LPs that fund start VCs generally, if they don't know what is happening, that's your small $10 million fund. Who will you give money? Who will you show that? We need that those
You're doing
postmortems, not
well.
just to
Yeah.
know, yeah, not just to know what went wrong. We need it because that sort of transparency enhances how everybody collectively makes better capital allocation decisions, which goes
Mm,
back all the way to the LPs, right? Because LPs can
mm.
learn that these people are learning. And hopefully, we begin to see more investors that don't just do this. Some of them do it internally, and it's a
Okay.
struggle because
Yeah.
our funders are notoriously closed off. But more people should be doing it publicly.
To listen to the full episode of this podcast, visit podcast.techpoint.africa or search for Techpoint Africa Podcast on your favorite podcast platforms.